The quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho, was still under a blanket of early winter when horror struck on the night of November 12, 2022, at a three-story rental house just off the University of Idaho campus for friends. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin settled into what seemed an ordinary weekend. They had spent the evening at parties, bars, and gatherings like many students did, unaware that the hours ahead would forever alter their town and the country's sense of safety. In the stillness of the early morning, between 4 o'clock and 4:25 a.m., a figure moved to the King Road residence. The killer, armed with a knife, attacked the sleeping students with calculated, silent brutality. When dawn broke, for promising young lives were gone, each stabbed multiple times, some showing signs of desperate struggle. The town woke to sirens, sealed crime scenes, and a silence that hung thick with disbelief. The police arrived to find chaos frozen in time. There was no forced entry, no signs of theft. 2 surviving roommates, terrified and disoriented, had been unaware of the full horror until hours later. Their accounts were fragmented by fear. Strange noises, a voice saying something indistinct, the shadow of a masked man walking through the hall. The brutality of the crime suggested rage or obsession, but no clear motive emerged. In the days that followed, fear rippled across campus. Students fled home early for Thanksgiving break. Every young person in town looked over their shoulder at night. Law enforcement poured resources into the case, tracing digital footprints, checking surveillance cameras, and analyzing DNA samples. By mid-November, investigators revealed they were searching for a white Hyundai Elantra spotted near the crime scene in the early hours of the murders. The car became the first major lead, a ghostly vehicle caught on video, circling the quiet streets around the victim's home again and again before vanishing into the darkness. Weeks turned into a month. Moscow's 25,000 residents lived in anxious limbo. Rumors multiplied online. Theories spread like wildfire. The small police department worked alongside the FBI and state investigators, combing through thousands of tips. Behind the scenes, forensic experts made a quiet discovery. On a tan leather knife sheath found near one of the victims lay a single trace of male DNA. It was faint, nearly invisible, but it would change everything. In December, the investigation widened to Pennsylvania. The white Elantra had been traced through license plate readers to a man named Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old Ph.D. criminology student at Washington State University, just 10 miles from Moscow. He lived across the state line, studying criminal behavior and violent offenders, and had once been described by professors as methodical and intensely analytical. To those who knew him, he was quiet, socially awkward, meticulous about his studies. But to the investigators, his habits seemed suddenly sinister. His car matched, his phone data matched the movement pattern, and now the DNA from his family's trash in Pennsylvania matched the sample from a knife sheath. On December 30th, 2022, just before dawn, police swarmed the Kohberger family home in the Pocono Mountains. They found him awake, wearing latex gloves, his face pale and calm. He asked one question: "Did you arrest anyone else?" He was extradited to Idaho, charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. His arrival in Moscow was captured on every major network, the accused killer returning to the small town he had studied from afar. Shackled and stone-faced, he entered the Latah County Jail under heavy security. The courtroom filled with families of the victims, their eyes locked on the man who, prosecutors said, had stalked their children. The affidavit revealed chilling details. Kohberger's phone had pinged near the victim's home on multiple occasions in the months before the murders, at least 12 times, often late at night. On the night of November 13th, his phone went dark for nearly 2 hours, exactly during the time of the killings, and then reappeared driving rapidly south from Moscow. The white Elantra was captured again on surveillance cameras, leaving the area at high speed. The trail of digital evidence was painstaking, precise, and damning. Kohberger, however, remained silent. He did not enter a plea during his first appearance. The court entered a not guilty plea on his behalf. His defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that DNA could be transferred indirectly, that the investigation had been tainted by public pressure. But public opinion was already heavy against him. The victims' families filled the courtroom during each hearing, their grief visible, their patience stretched thin. As the months went on, the case grew even more complex. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, citing the brutality and premeditation of the attack. The defense filed motion after motion to move the trial, to suppress DNA evidence, to challenge the validity of the genealogical tracing used to identify him. The legal battles became as technical as they were emotional. Meanwhile, the King Roadhouse, the scene of the massacre, stood empty behind police tape for months. It became a grim landmark, visited by mourners, journalists, and strangers who left flowers and notes at the fence. In early 2024, the University of Idaho announced the house would be demolished, calling it a step toward healing. But for some families, the decision felt like an erasure of history, the destruction of a crime scene that still held unanswered questions. Inside the courtroom, Kohberger's demeanor remained eerily calm. He often sat motionless, eyes fixed forward, taking notes with a steady hand. His defense attorneys painted him as a man wrongly accused, a victim of coincidence and flawed science. But prosecutors laid out a different portrait, a man who studied the patterns of killers not as an academic, but as a student of his own impulses. They described his research, his social media habits, his tendency to follow victims online, and his repeated late-night drives past their home. The trial was set for 2025, but before it began, the tone of the case shifted dramatically. In July of that year, after months of negotiations, Bryan Kohberger unexpectedly changed his plea. In exchange for removing the death penalty from the table, he pleaded guilty to all 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. The courtroom fell silent as he admitted to the killings. For the first time, he spoke clearly, his voice low, saying the words guilty 4 times. Yet even in confession, he offered no explanation, no motive, no apology, only silence after the verdict. 3 weeks later, the sentencing took place. Families of the victims stood one by one to deliver statements that cut through the air like blades. Parents spoke of empty bedrooms and birthdays that would never come again. A surviving roommate described sleepless nights, frozen in fear at every creak in the floorboards. The prosecutor called Kohberger's acts a study in cruelty. When it was his turn to speak, Kohberger declined. He simply stared ahead, expressionless. Judge Stephen Hippler addressed court with measured gravity. "What we don't know," he said, "and may never know, is why." Then he handed down the sentence for consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus 10 additional years for a burglary. Kohberger was escorted away, head bowed but face emotionless, into a lifetime of silence. The legal case ended that day, but the story did not. Months later, newly released police documents revealed further layers of the investigation. Witness accounts of strange noises, flashes of light, the terrified whispers of survivors. They describe how the killer had likely entered through the sliding glass door, how the dog in the house barked frantically, how footprints were found in the hallway. Forensic reports detailed how the DNA was recovered from the button of the knife sheath, how genealogical tracing led from distant relatives to the Kohberger family, and how detectives worked around the clock to close the circle of suspicion. Even now, long after sentencing, the motive remains a void, a chilling silence at the heart of an otherwise meticulously documented crime. Some speculate about obsession, about resentment toward the carefree social world of college students, about rejection and alienation. Others believe it was the culmination of an intellectual fascination turned into violence. Whatever the truth, it remains sealed behind his emotionless face and unspoken words. Moscow, Idaho, has tried to move forward. The house is gone. A memorial garden has taken its place. Students have returned, though the town carries an invisible scar. Each November, the bells ring for the 4 who were lost, and candlelight flickers in windows across campus. The case of Bryan Kohberger stands as both a triumph of forensic investigation and a haunting reminder of the darkness that can hide behind ordinary faces. In the end, justice arrived not through vengeance, but through persistence, a long trail of data points, DNA strands, and sleepless nights spent by investigators refusing to let the story fade. For young lives, stolen in silence, now live on in memory and in the lesson their tragedy carved into the heart of a nation. That evil could with a massive intellect and that even the smallest trace, a single-cell DNA, can speak for the voiceless.